Okay, folks, here we go. This is MK Palmore with another edition of the Leadership Student Podcast. I have in the virtual studio today Corey Thomas, the CEO, chairman of the board of directors for Rapid7, and quite frankly, a luminary figure in the cybersecurity field, especially for folks like myself who look up to Corey as a leader in the industry. I was very interested in getting Corey into the studio and having a conversation about my favorite topic, leadership. And Corey, I appreciate you coming into the studio, joining us on the Leadership Student. Thank you for making the time.
MK, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Corey, let's go back a little bit. We'll get to the CEO of Rapid7 here in a couple of minutes, but let's go back maybe to your childhood. First impressions of a leader in your life or someone who you took guidance from that really made an impact on you. Who was that person for you?
For me, it's hard because you got to go back in time, and as we get older, we forget a whole bunch of stuff. But when you ask, the figure that stands out to me is my grandfather. My grandfather was, oh, my maternal grandfather was like a classical family patriarch in some ways, and so he was an entrepreneur. He was a minister. He built his own church from scratch. He was always dispensing what we should and should not do, or my grandmother was telling us. So my grandfather stands out to me as like the a leadership model and ideal, not one that I kept, oddly enough, over the years, but it's the first memory of it.
Interesting. You noted that you didn't keep the lessons necessarily. Why is that? And what was it about your grandfather's leadership style that
Well,
maybe
well, I think
didn't coincide with what developed to be your own?
so. I think a couple different things. One is, just to be clear, and my own kids will probably hear this at some point in time, is just that we all learn that our parents and grandparents are human. I keep trying to remind my 21-year-old daughter that I am like human, and it's just I can't believe you were wrong about that. I'm like, of course I was wrong. But the so I would say I kept lots of stuff from my grandfather and my father and my mother and my parents. They had some wonderful things, and then they had some things that just didn't actually age well. Like my grandfather was a black man who grew up in the South. The thing that I kept with me was his sense of how to actually have your own agency in life, and when things aren't going well, not to be brought down by the things you don't control, but to actually really focus on the things you can, which I would just say has been like critical in my life, about focus on the things you can actually do to make progress and not be dragged down by the things you actually can't control, or injustice or unfairness. So I would say I kept that as like a key thing. What I did not keep so much, and my grandfather was an incredibly charismatic man, as you can imagine, as a minister who built his own church in the South. What I didn't keep is necessarily his view of leadership, which was much more patriarchal, and there is a voice that has the answers, and that knows what to do, and the fact that if I'm in a leadership position, I know all the answers, and therefore I have it. And maybe he didn't actually really believe that, because I knew him as a child, not as an adult. But that was
Right.
definitely the lesson that was actually taught, even if that's not the way he actually believed.
Early impressions, certainly from the family. What about outside of the family? Did you play sports or anything in high school,
Oh yeah,
college? Yeah.
I played football and basketball, and I was a mediocre athlete at both of them. And I learned a couple things. One, I still remember Coach Tyler, my high school, my middle school football coach, and
What position?
running back, wide receiver, and then cornerback. But I remember him telling me something that I think he meant as both a bit of inspiration, but also trying to make sure that I kept my expectations like in check. And what he said to me is, you work hard and you have okay talent, but you just don't have the raw speed. You just don't have that raw thing to be exceptional, but you could be solid. But what he said was just like, hey, you have the work ethic and the tenacity. And actually, like that can take you a lot further than you actually think. And for me, that actually stuck with me, because the thing that he was actually pushing was, we all have natural things that we're actually good at or not good at. We all have natural like barriers, but we can actually go a lot further with like focused like work ethic, learning, tenacity. And his point is that for where you are right now, your barrier is not like the gifts you've been endowed with, It's your ability to actually hone them. And that actually as a mentality actually stuck with me throughout life, where it's easy to think that I'm not good at something. I have this discussion with my kids. And there's lots of people that have natural gifts that actually get outplayed, out exceeded with people who have lesser talents and lesser gifts, but the people just work at it much more focused and much more tenaciously. And so that's one of the lessons I got from sports.
I wonder if I use this generation as an example because I spend a lot of time, as you well know, talking to folks about getting into the cybersecurity arena. And what you're talking about there, the work ethic portion, the actual work that's required to transcend maybe the skills that others have and then ultimately be able to distinguish yourself, I think is something that gets lost often. So I appreciate you mentioning that. I've been talking to my own middle son about the idea of needing to distinguish yourself among your peers. Do you remember the first time that you recognized that you could, through your actions, distinguish yourself and separate yourself from the pack? Because I found that folks like yourself that end up in leadership positions, like chief executive officer of companies, it probably has been a thread through your life that at some point someone identified in you that this person could lead or could be a voice or could stand out in a crowd. Do you remember the first time that happened for you and maybe at what level that was at?
I don't remember the first time. There's several different things that actually come to mind. Is one was that at our church we were all expected to do different leadership like roles. I don't remember being separated out. In fact, much of my childhood I was like striving hard to actually be like in the top like 20%, but I was never actually the best at
Okay.
anything. So I would put in a lot of effort, but I was never actually the best. Like I was a good student, but not like an extraordinary student. I was a good athlete, but not an extraordinary athlete. And so it was always like never quite there. And I would have to work hard for everything. But what I do remember though was being given lots of responsibility, and my dad really have and both of my parents had this mentality is that you can actually figure it out. And so my dad used to be a janitor for a bunch of churches in the area, and he was just like, hey, you own cleaning up this floor and manage it, and I would manage my friends to actually do it, but you own like this, and quality is your responsibility. And he would pay me, and then I would pay my friends, and it was like a trust about the responsibility and the pride of doing things. So I remember that. I also remember the bitterness of having to wake up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning to go clean up. But I remember the responsibility around that. I would say the first time that I can at least remember back, and again I'm older, is that I actually won something was my in high school. I got long story. I got moved to this magnet school, but we won this
Mhm.
science competition for the state, and we actually got to go to DC for the state finals. It was my first time I had ever gone on an airplane in my life. We didn't have lots of money, and that stood out to me as I remembered that because that was a big deal that we got to travel to a state competition.
Okay. Outstanding. Vanderbilt undergrad, MBA at Harvard Business School. Talk to us a little bit about your first opportunity to work in corporate America and what that was like for you.
I got really lucky. So I had two opportunities. One, my in high school, my mother got me a job in the mailroom of her job in her office in the school district, which was actually a great opportunity. My first real big corporate job, though, I had the benefit of doing this program that's I think is still here today called Inroads, which helped people of color find jobs in corporate America. And in Inroads, you went on the Saturdays to actually get like corporate America skills and business skills. And my first job was intern in IT, which was just a fantastic sort of like introduction. I grow up dreaming of working at Bell Labs and working around that. And so I thought all my dreams had actually come true when I got that experience. And it was a rude awakening in lots of ways because I had to learn how to navigate. I got lots of coaching about like how to be in the workforce, and that's sort of
Right.
when we had to really. There was lots of pressure on like how you assimilated, how you act, and how you actually did certain things. But I also got to be AT&T in a time when it was in utter distress in the '90s, and you saw it like breaking up, falling apart, and it triggered something in me because I had this company that I had idolized all of my life, and to see it struggle was a shock for like my sort of like young
Right.
18-year-old brain, which really catalyzed I think my career in many ways into entrepreneurship and other things because I end up with this question is like, how do all these brilliant people fail? And it's one of the things that's always catalyzed me about, well, if it's not the smartest people that makes an organization successful, and it's not the best technology, what the heck makes something work and makes something successful? But that was the first experience that I actually had in corporate America. And it was a big learning experience.
Have you taken that thread that you just described throughout your experience in
All
business?
throughout my life, it's look, it's the reason that after AT&T, I went to Deloitte Consulting, because one of the things was is consultants must know how, like, why businesses are successful or not, which I found out wasn't true. Then I went to business school and be like, all right, this sort of must be what it is.
This
Because
is
I
where I'm going
start,
to get all the
this is
answers,
where I'm
right?
going to get the answers, and you don't get the answers. And then from, because I originally thought that, listen, the best technology, the best people, the best talent win. And so seeing a lot of places where that wasn't always the case. So after business school, and again, I grew up in a world that was different. And so like we were a little bit, and I love Microsoft to this day. But if you grew up in a Unix world, you were condescending to Microsoft technologies.
Right.
And after business school, I went to go work at Microsoft. I'm like, it must be marketing that actually sort of like makes things great. And along the way, and then in Microsoft ups and downs, then I went to startups. But along the way, this question about what makes organizations thrive is always it's an evergreen question that doesn't have an answer, but it has lots of learnings too that I've actually learned along the way, that really involves both the science but also the art of actually being in groups and being in communities and being in organizations together. But that's one of my things that's always interested me.
So what do you draw away from those experiences as learning lessons? What's the most important thing? Is it the people on the bus? Is it the culture? Is it the technology? Like as you begin to rank stack the importance of these things,
Yeah.
what's your learning from?
Yeah, my learning is that it's an interplay of a lot of different things. One, like relevance matters. You can have the best people in the world, but if they're in something that's actually dying, the team at Kodak was geniuses, but there's no, you could double the capacity and the intelligence of the team. And that's just a hard problem to solve, is like, how do you actually transform an industry that's actually dying? So what you're doing matters. And so that's the first thing, like the space you actually live in, play in really matters. That's part of why I love cybersecurity. It's relevant and it's
Right.
going to be relevant. It's there. The
Some
other
time. Yeah.
one is that I put a lot of stock into the attitude, aptitude, and culture of an organization and a team. Having a group of people that want to build excellence together, as long as they have enough aptitude, they don't even have to be the smartest, but like this desire to actually build excellence together, it's so hard to actually keep a set of people, especially as the organization grows, that actually are concerned about doing excellent work and doing it together. That as long as as much as you can actually keep the mentality of excellence and the mentality of creating something like great together, that ends up mattering a lot. And then I do think you actually need like the right skill sets for the dynamic. That's what I would just say is one personal learning, is that leadership is situational. Is the leader that you actually need and the leadership skills you need is has a lot to do with what challenges or opportunities you actually have in front of you. And not all leaders are good for certain opportunities. So I could be great in one space, but I could be the same exact person and I could be an utter failure in another place. So you have to make sure that you actually have the right fit.
How hard is it to pull together the team of the right people with the right skill sets that you need for a particular?
That's what's hard.
Yeah.
We're hard because we're human. Look, there's been times in my life when I'm like, I would say 80% of my life, I'm focused on excellence and the intensity of actually doing great work. But when my son was born and we had challenges and he had a rough sort of like first couple years, that was not my biggest focus area and concern. And so what I would just say is that it's hard because you're never going to have perfect alignment and focus and intensity on the excellence piece because we're human, and that's okay. That's not the goal. But navigating that such that you actually have a team and a group of people that are focused on doing extraordinarily good work and pushing the boundaries, and it's not a job, it's about creating and building like great things together, is it's meaningful and it's actually important. But that requires like a getting people that have the right sort of like general mindset, distribution, attitude, people that really want to learn, that people really want to evolve. You meet some people and they are like, I actually know how the world works, and if people just did what I said, everything will be fine. And that to me is the most like, I'm like, keep those people away from me. I want to be around people that are actually deeply curious about the way the world works and know that we're living in a flow and that
Right.
things change and they want to understand how things change. And finding those people, creating the space where they actually work together, that's just hard work.
Yeah, I call that mentality the student mindset,
Yeah,
hence the name of the podcast. Because I feel like there's just always another lesson to be learned in the leadership
there
realm.
is.
There's just no
Exactly.
way you're gonna come to the table. I don't care how many deep experiences you've had. There's no way you're gonna come to the table and be ready for everything under the sun because, like you indicated, there are humans involved, and humans just naturally have this infinite ability to bring a different set of circumstances to the table that will be unique and new to any particular situation.
It is. And also, like, it's wondrous that we're in a flow of change. Like, things are always changing. Sometimes they're changing faster, sometimes they're changing slower. But like the world is changing. And so that's an opportunity. But it also makes it like hard where no one should feel comfortable resting on their laurels.
So, with the idea of the fluidity of situational affairs in business and leadership, how do you maintain accountability? There's certainly a belief system that you want to allow people space to fail, to miss, and learn from those experiences, and then be able to move forward. How do you ensure that you're allowing folks the space to do that, but at the same time holding people accountable for missing on parts where they should have been able to do better?
So I think that so you hit on an excellent question. So one, I just say we have to separate two things. Um, you have to have a tolerance for failure, but you have to have an intolerance for sloppiness. And those are two really big things.
Right.
Failures that are the result of sloppiness are unacceptable and they should actually not be tolerated at all. So, things where you actually didn't do your homework, you didn't prepare, you didn't do the work, like any reasonable preparedness that could have prevented it wasn't done. There's a different set of failure that's completely acceptable. Is that sometimes, and in fact, I would say the harder thing, we're going, the whole economy is going through this. There's lots of organizations that did fine in a zero interest rate environment that were actually, and a lot of people who did fine that actually didn't do good work. And so you can actually have good results and not have done good work. The other side is true. You can have actually done excellent work, the right work, and you actually had like a failure because you know what? You did really good work. You did your homework. You had to actually take a bet on imperfect information, and the bet didn't play out. That's fine. That's a healthy fair. You should learn from that. You should evolve from that. And so the if the type of failure really matters. Like the type of failures that I respect and I learned from is that we took a bet that was a clear bet, well executed, and it didn't work out, and that's a learning. That's great. That builds the strength, the knowledge, the capacity of the organization. Sloppiness is a completely separate thing, and that should not be tolerated and accepted. The other piece of it that I tell my leadership team is that in general, even when we take good bets, we're going to have some failures. We just can't have repeated failures. And so you have to win more than you lose. So the way that I think about it is your losses need to count for less and your wins need to count for more. But there's no such thing as success over a long term if you don't win in general. You have to win. And
Right.
so you have to just make sure that you know, if you're well managing when you have failures, you actually catch them, you learn from them, and they actually lead up. And when you actually have wins, you scale them and you leverage
Anything from your leadership background that I hate using the term failure because you actually learn from
them. Yes, they're fine.
mishaps
Failures are
or
fine.
misses. Yeah, you learn from those things. Anything stick out in your mind is just something that you carry with you. I could have done a better job in any one particular situation that just sticks in your craw for the long term.
Oh, I have a lot of, the issue is I have so many of them that they crowd out spaces. One of them was when I was at Microsoft, I was responsible for this product launch. And I did a poor job because I did not want to ask for help. And luckily, I had a good boss and a good friend, Margaret, who actually forced me to actually get help. But I almost led it to failure because I did not want to ask for help, and that was more about my ego. And I was given a job. I was so concerned about the fact that I wanted to know that I could do a good job that I refused to actually acknowledge where I actually needed help. So that's one. That's one learning. Another big one that I'll never forget is it was early, like shortly after I became CEO. We had an issue and we had to make some changes. It didn't work out. It wasn't working out. And I was a little bit paralyzed. And as I talked to my friends, I realized sort of two things. Is one, Under stress, I was isolating myself, and embarrassment was leading me to actually become more self-contained. And when you're under pressure, that's when you need your friends, that's when you need collaboration, that's when you actually need engagement the most. And I was a pretty miserable person. And luckily, I had a good friend and a good colleague who actually really pushed me that like self isolation is not what you actually need when you're under extreme duress and extreme pressure. And it was actually leading me to actually do a poor job. So those two things are like just two early things that actually just stand out in my mind.
Amazing. Your ascent at Rapid Seven. Were you part of the founding team at
I was
Rapid
not
Seven, or
part of
did you come
the
in?
founding team. I was
Or
the
did you
hired.
come?
I came in. I think I was like when the company had 50 people or so,
Okay.
and it was like a couple $1 million in revenue, like $6, $7 million in revenue.
What do you think was the critical factor that leads you from an executive position in the company to being designated the CEO? Anything, any one particular critical situation, or were you just able to show over a period of time your ability to
I would
lead,
just, yeah. Look, I think it's an
garner
intersection of.
teams? Yeah.
Yeah, it was the intersection of a lot. So one, it was half a set. It was not the plan. It was not my
Okay.
plan. It was not Rapid Seven's plan. I was supposed to come in and help scale it for a few years and help mature it and then go do something else. I actually had wanted to start my own business. And so what I'll just say is that even today, I think you have to hold on. You have to have aspirations, but there's an art to actually having strong aspirations, but not hold them too tightly. And so I had planned to actually build a company. I had not planned on actually sort of being CEO of Rapid Seven. And so that wasn't the case at the time. Now, what happened along the way was I drove some bold bets at the time. I did the acquisition of Metasploit early on and got to partner with HD Moore, who's actually brilliant. We had some business success along the way. We had a couple crises that like were unplanned, but I stepped into them. And for lots of people, by the way, that's a very common thing. Is how do you perform under duress ends up being an opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I certainly had some of those. I had some failures, but had some good team members and some grace around that. But those things set up a dynamic where when there was an opportunity and the company had to actually look at like hiring a CEO from the outside or taking a risk of someone who had never done it before, it was a risk to be clear at the time. Like I was not qualified to actually do the job. I built enough credibility where I remember the board conversation was like, "Hey, let's give it a year and see how it goes." Like that's it was not like it was a confidence. We believe you can do it, but let's just see how it actually goes. And so there was credibility, but it's something that I had to prove out that it was actually like going to work out. And I wasn't sure at the time really either.
Right. How have you grown both as a leader and a person just from the time that you step into the shoes as a CEO, right? You've now been the CEO for how many years?
Oh, good Lord. It is now going on, I would just say 11 years now. Yeah, it's
11
11 years.
years as a C corporation in an industry that has been one of the most dynamic industries I think that we can account for in the past decade. Surely there's been just an immense amount of growth, expectation, experiences. When you look back at the young Corey Thomas who agrees to take on the reins of this responsibility to the successful CEO that you are now, what do you think about the growth that you've experienced during the course of that decade plus time?
Oh, it's a lot. The thing with cybersecurity companies is you have to be a different company every 3 to 5 years if you're going to be relevant and you're going to stay relevant. So I've gone through that twice. We're going through another sort of like version of that right now. And and I would love to actually, my hope was I could be the same person in some ways I was and bring it to the table. But it's a different organization, different world, different circumstance. And the thing I always tell young entrepreneurs is the same thing out the face is the job you want to do doesn't matter. Your desires don't matter. You always have to look and say, what's the job that needs to be done? And at different phases of the company, the job as CEO that I needed to do has actually been different. And sometimes it's been harder, sometimes it's been natural. And so if you look at a couple different things when you think about what's the job that needs to be done, not the job that you actually want to do, I am a very good product manager. I love like products, I love building them, I love time, like I love to actually go, I love engaging with customers. I love technology and I love building technology. It's the passion. I'm good at it. When I spend time on it, like it's fun. I love teaching like the discipline of product management and some of the other stuff to teams. Uh, but what I found out over time is the thing that I'm actually good of is not the most important thing for the company to have. I love it when those moments come up. The most important thing for me to actually do today is to actually build great teams. The most important thing that when we went through the pandemic, one of my big lessons learned that got neglected is that when you send everyone home and you're doing everything remote, social cohesion, just like growth, can cover up for a lot. I had to actually be really good at saying, like, how do we actually scale, and how do we have documented processes, and how do we actually make sure that we actually have a consistent experience. Hey, like, that is not something I wake up every morning and say, I have to make sure that my customers get a consistent, high quality experience. And how do we have the right processes? Like, that was not like my idea of fun,
Not
but
on your
that's the
bingo
job.
card.
But
Right.
that's the job. That's the job that needed to actually be done. So I had to immerse myself and talk to people and learn and say, okay, is if you don't have this sort of like social cohesion where like your support team and your engineers are sitting next to each other and they're talking, you have all that dynamicism, is how do we actually create a high quality, consistent experience? I had to become like a process like designer and engineer and build around that. And to answer your question is I've had to change lots. There's been some things that I've changed as a person about like my outlook and how do I think about life. That probably has more to do with my kids and being a husband and a father than anything else. But in work, I've also had to actually change just because the job required different things. And I've had to step up to do the job that needed to be done versus the job that was easy for me.
You've probably experienced being what I like to describe as one of one in many rooms. You are a CEO of a major cybersecurity company. There are not many people of color in leadership positions in the cybersecurity industry, nor operate as the CEO, chairman of the board of directors for a large scale cybersecurity company in the industry. Has that experience of being an executive leader, African American in today's society, has that experience been unique? What have you noticed in terms of how you navigate the space and navigate rooms as a leader in the industry? What's that experience been like for you?
It's an interesting one because I didn't know what to expect. So, a couple things. One, when I was in high school, I went to a school that had wonderful people, but it was in a challenged school district. And my mother, through lots of work and tenacity, got me tested into a magnet school. And so I got bused to school. I had the experience of being one of a few Black people at this magnet school. Luckily, I wrote the bus with people that looked like me. But then I was
Mm-hmm.
one of the few people in the honors and AP classes in high school. And the reason that's actually a little bit important, because the same thing happened at Vanderbilt, the same thing happened at AT&T, the same thing happened, uh, is I think that it's really hard. And I told my mom this in retrospect, it was incredibly difficult my sophomore year in high school, where I went through this sort of like shocking transition. But every 10 years, it got a little bit easier because I've been doing it for so long. So it was not a
Right.
new experience. And so that's one. The second one is to your question about like being one of the few sort of like Black CEOs and Black executives. One thing that stands out, like I talked to sort of like one of my mentors, Ken Chenault, and he'll tell you like we always thought it would grow, but there was a strong crop of people in the 90s and 2000s that looked like they were, if you look at public company CEOs, and you actually see less now. No, it looks like we have another strong set of people that are like stepping into leadership roles. But it is a little bit disheartening that we don't have more diverse leaders like running companies. The personal experience that I actually have runs the gamut. And so let me just talk a little bit about what that means. Yes, I've had experiences where I walked into the room and someone thought I was the eight in an investor room and I got treated like the eight. I've also had wonderful experiences of coaching and mentoring around. I've had experiences where people actually presume that they know me based on stereotypes, and they actually didn't actually know me. And so I would just say I've had good experiences and I've had bad experiences. And I think that's human at some level. This is a little bit of where I do take my grandfather's early wisdom like into play. It's sort of two things that actually stand out. Is one is look at life as a blessing and think about what you can actually do with what you've given, not the adversity that's actually in front of you. And again, I talked
Right.
earlier about like that mindset that I actually brought to the table. And so even when I'm in some of those experiences, that's their issue. That's not my issue. Because I've been blessed and blessed mightily. And so that's one like thing that actually stands out and actually comes to mind. The other one that I frankly feel more than anything else is how do I actually mentor, network, and build connections amongst other people at different other sort of people of color across different layers of management to create more of a pipeline so it's not like that in the future. So those are like the two things that I actually think about. And so like some of my role models, I look at people like Jim Cash, who's actually done a phenomenal job of actually bringing diverse leaders through corporate American ranks. And I think we all have to be carriers of that legacy.
How you touched on the mentoring piece a couple of times. How important is it for you to make time to mentor others? And what's the experience been like? I'm sure you have, I call it like my personal board of advisors, the folks that I turn to for those conversations that have been there and done that. Talk about that in both directions,
Well,
mentoring
yeah,
down and also who you turn to for those moments of salient conversations that you might need to have.
yeah, like I am blessed to actually have lots of people that I actually can turn to, both friends, people that are retired and with lots of experience. And I spend a lot of time with, as usual, if the personal board of advisors. And look, I think the most important thing you actually get out of it is when you're candid. And so when I'm talking to them, I'm just talking about what's working, what I'm excited about, life struggles. They're often helping me actually think about how to balance like work and family and civic obligations. And so I think you have to bring your whole self to those discussions. I find I get more out of my quote unquote large circle of personal board of advisors when I'm authentic and honest about what's really happening with me. And that requires a little bit of work to actually be, for me to be honest about what's happening with myself. But when I am, I get really good counsel. When I'm not, and it's easy to fall into everything's fine. Like that's one of my issues. My son says it. That's how I know I'm bad at it. It's so hey, everything's fine. When I'm in everything's fine mode, one, I get the worst out of it because that's not sort of like authentic and everything's not fine. And so that's one thing. When I mentor, the one thing I actually tell people when I mentor, because you nailed it with the personal board of advisors, um, I've had to pull people out of this Yoda mindset, and this is more of a geek Star Wars thing. But sometimes people are looking for one mentor to actually guide them. I'm like, that doesn't really work and effectively. And you also don't want that. It's not a healthy thing. I think you want to be part of a community and a network where people are giving you advice and perspective, and you're giving other people advice and perspective. And so when I mentor people, what I tell them is that we're part of a community together, but it's not my job to actually teach them how to live life. It's my job to actually be in community with them and to actually share my experiences and for them to process that and process other people's experiences and for them to share their experiences with me. And so those are the two things that I think about, so like mentorship. And I do think access is a powerful thing. And so as much as I can, I try to like when it's the right situation, provide introductions and connections so other people are mutually enhanced.
So I touched on the subject before we got started on personal wellness. I have to imagine that you are, I like to call folks like yourself, busiest people on the planet. Like you have a lot of things pulling at you from the corporate side of the house, your family life, your mentorship, your entrepreneurial spirit. I know you serve on several boards, that you lead a company. What do you do for personal wellness? How do you detach? How do you make sure that you are functioning at the highest optimal level that you can as an individual?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think it's one that always demands attention. So to me, there's three things and it's probably more, but three stand out and come to mind. One of them, the first one is that my energy has to be expended. So I have to work out every day and I walk as much as I can, but like the physical expense of energy is important for me to actually feel good. And I'm a CEO of a technology company. So like the power of the chair to be sedentary is strong. And people know I like to do walk-in meetings like when I can. I think I drive my assistant crazy with you gotta give me 5 minutes just to take a walk in between things. But I work out every day and I move around as much as I can. Any meeting I can walk to, I walk to. But like mobility and the ability to actually like move and express energy that way is a big one. The second one is it's my wife has actually been very good at this and pushing me for this because I am very like that sense of intense focus on excellence and want to be like good and want to be able to do it and the sense of duty is I am naturally strong. And my wife's view is just like, hey, that's good, but you actually have to play some too. You got to have a little bit of like play and you got to have a little, and that is important for the creative cycle and the creative energy. And I spend time like both with the family and my wife and the kids. looking at how we actually build that sense of play and that sense of engagement around whether it's my son who's learning how to play golf, us learning how to play golf together as a family, whether it's like having dinner or drinks with a friend and catching up. I will try. I told you I'm like a good general mediocre athlete. I do a bunch of stuff. I go skiing with friends. I'll play tennis. I do everything okay. If it's with my family members, we'll play spades together. But finding time to actually have that sense of time with family and friends is important. I'm in New York today. I'm having dinner with a friend this evening. So I think that's the second one that I need to do. And the third one is I am an introvert. I'm a borderline introvert. And that just means I have a very long fuse, but I have to have some time for myself. This is partially why I take walks sometimes. But I've learned that I need time for myself that does not have people around, to sit, read, think, and ponder. And I'm a better person. I'm a better husband. I'm a better colleague. I'm a better friend when I actually have that.
Corey, I know that you are busy. I want to thank you for spending time having this conversation with me here today in the virtual studio. Sir, I want to tell you, you are an absolute beacon. There are those of us in the industry who certainly look up to you. Keep being excellent, keep striving for excellence, keep doing what you do because we recognize it and we see it as an opportunity for all of us to level up our game. So we certainly appreciate what you've been doing in the industry, and we want to continue to see you thrive. So I
Well,
appreciate the time and I appreciate the conversation.
thank you. And I have to say, thank you not just for having me, thank you both for the podcast, but also thank you for the work that you're doing in the community because you've actually found a way with the work that you're doing in the community to actually really scale mentorship, leadership. And so thank you for that. It really does matter.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. That's it for this episode of the Leadership Student Podcast. Thank you, Corey Thomas, and thank you to the team at Rapid 7 for making sure he could carve out time to speak with us today. We appreciate the gems that we got from the conversation, and we will see you guys next time on the Leadership Student Podcast. Thanks again.